Tony Blair has been visiting Gaza on the eve of a major donors conference in Egypt on how to rebuild this strip. It's the first time Mr. Blair has visited Gaza since becoming the Middle East envoy to the so-called Quartet, which represents the United States, Russia, the European Union and the United Nations. Tony Blair says he wanted to hear first-hand accounts of what it was like to live there during and after the war, and he joins me now live from Tel Aviv. So you wanted to go there to hear what people were saying and what they saw. What have you heard?
Well, I don't think I was very surprised by what I heard. Obviously, it's very shocking. There's massive devastation and damage there, and there's a huge amount of trauma amongst the population. But also there's a lot of determination to try and rebuild out of it. And our task, I think, is firstly, obviously, to make sure that this conference is a success and pledges the necessary money to help the Gazan people. But then, secondly, that we find a way out of the political impasse.
But how can you rebuild when Israeli obstacles remain in place, the siege remains?
Well, I think one of the things we've got to do is to have a different and better strategy for Gaza that actually helps get material in that supports the people. And that's not just the basic humanitarian stuff like food and fuel and medicine and so on, and proper amounts of that, but also rebuilding the infrastructure, making sure there's proper electricity and water, that the houses that are damaged are rebuilt, that the basic life of the community there can continue. And one of the conversations I was having was with people from the Gazan business sector who are decent, hard-working people. They're not extremists in any shape or form at all, but their businesses have been devastated, in some cases razed to the ground. They need help. But they also need to make sure that they can produce goods in Gaza and ship them out.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, most of them can't get the goods in and a lot of them can't get the goods out until these borders remain in place, these obstacles.
Yeah, exactly. So what we've got to work on at the same time as making sure that we get the right amount of money pledged, and personally I think we will. I mean, I think you'll find a substantial sum of money pledged in the next couple of days to the people in Gaza. But the point is to get that money in a way that works productively and helps Gaza get back on its feet. And for that, we need the changes,
sorry, excuse me interrupting. How's it going to be different this time? I mean, when you took the job in 2007, you called for reconstruction, you called for infrastructure, you called for to raise the standard of living. If anything, it's got worse. 80% of the Palestinians are now dependent on aid. 65% live below the poverty line, and business has almost just been totally destroyed.
That's in Gaza, and it's true because of what has happened in Gaza over the past 18 months or so. The people of Gaza and the private sector there has declined. It's not, of course, true in the West Bank, and it's extremely important to understand that. In the West Bank in 2008, the economy grew by 6 or 7%.
Yeah, but the West Bank is not the issue here. It's Gaza that has been devastated by the war. It's Gaza that has been devastated by the siege.
Of course, but you were talking about the Palestinian people as a whole, and it's important to realise that obviously 2/3 of them live in the West Bank, and the West Bank has not been in the same situation. Now, we need big change in the West Bank as well, incidentally.
They are greatly affected by the Israeli siege, by this latest 22-day war.
Yes, I do know that, Jane. I was just coming back to that. But it is important to recognise that there are people in the West Bank, and they also need a future too. Now, in respect of Gaza, we need to get the politics right, because as I said to you, it's not just the amount of money pledged, it's also resolving the political impasse. Now, that political impasse is about reopening the crossings, and that means that you have a viable, durable ceasefire, and that we make sure that the violence stops coming out of Gaza as well as going into Gaza. But secondly, that we get a basis for a unity government on the Palestinian side. And it's precisely that Egypt is working on at the moment.
How will you be able to progress this peace process until the Israelis are confronted and made to do what they've promised to do? We've had since you became Middle East envoy, the Annapolis, absolutely no progress there. You said there'd only be peace if there was a two-state solution. There's been no progress there either.
Well, I actually don't think, in fact, that there was no progress after Annapolis. I think for the first time, the two sides were sitting down and talking about the essential issues. That's to do with the territory, Jerusalem, the issues to do with refugees and so on. I mean, the problem, however, is that we are not going to get a solution unless, in my view, three things have to happen. First of all, we get a credible negotiating process, and that's got to be taken forward now by the new American administration as well as the Israeli government and the Palestinians. Secondly, we need not small steps of change on the West Bank. There have been some changes. We actually need transformative change. And thirdly, as I say, we need a different, better strategy for Gaza, one that actually helps the people there that are decent and want a better life and a better future, actually helps them get one. Now, I think it is possible to put those three elements together in a package that would make a real difference. But in each case, it requires some tough decisions. And yes, of course, you're right, that Israel's got to be prepared to fulfill its obligations, but we also need to make sure that we stop rockets being fired at innocent Israeli civilians as well, and that we need to make sure that the security issues that Israel has, which are real, are dealt with. So you've got to deal with all aspects of this. Now, I think it is possible.
How are you going to deal with Benjamin Netanyahu?
It's going to be a big challenge for obvious reasons.
Excuse me interrupting. He's going to be putting together the new coalition government. It looks like he's going to align himself with right-wing parties. Are you going to be able to work with him on this?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we've got to work with whoever the Israeli people elect. And I think, let's test this out rather than simply assume it won't work. But those elements, the viable political process, change on the West Bank, and a new strategy for Gaza. I mean, certainly in respect to the first of those two things, I've discussed both of those with him, and I think he understands that the only way that this issue can be moved forward in a way that's good for people in Israel, not simply the Palestinians and the rest of the world, is if we take a two-state solution and make it a reality. And yes, we need major change on the ground for that to happen, but what is the alternative to a two-state solution? I mean, I can't see one, and a one-state solution is going to mean a major conflict, not just actually here, but around the region.
And are we going to see you more active in Gaza? There was a lot has been said about the fact that ahead of the donor conference, which is taking place tomorrow, it was easy for you to get into Gaza. It'll be easy for you to get out. Very little can get in and very little can get out. I mean, in fact, since you took over the job as Middle East Envoy in 2007, it's now March 2009, this is the first time you have been to Gaza. What has taken so long?
Well, I think you know what took so long last time. There was a real and genuine security problem with my going in, so I wasn't able to go.
I think that was only in July, and that security threat has been disputed.
Yeah, maybe it may be disputed by some people, but it wasn't disputed by the people who were advising me, and I have to take account of that advice. However, having said that, look, this isn't about me,
But how can you do
frankly,
the job as... But it is very important. I mean, you are the Middle East envoy, and a lot is dependent on your actions, and we know what a good peacemaker you are able to be. I mean, as Middle East envoy, how can you do your job without seeing the place firsthand?
Absolutely, which is why I went in today, and that will be the first but not the last visit. But the circumstances have got to be right to do it. And incidentally, over the past 18 months, since, well, in fact, 15 months, since the December conference of 2007 in Paris, we got the largest amount of aid that the Palestinian people have received. I mean, they received... well, actually, half of it did go to Gaza, in the form of salaries that were paid by the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority, incidentally, that's putting forward, through Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, a reconstruction plan for Gaza at this donor conference. That is a plan that, if we implemented it, would make a dramatic difference to the lives of people in Gaza. But you know what the problem is, and I know what the problem is. We've had a divided Palestinian politics, and we've had a situation where, yes, of course, I mean, people can disagree strongly with actions that Israel has taken, but the fact is there have been rockets fired at innocent Israeli civilians coming out of Gaza as well. And the existence of that strategy of firing rockets makes peacemaking so much harder. You know, if we wanted to make peace, the first thing to do is to stop the violence. You stop it, you create the space in which people can seek common ground and try and find some common principles to move the thing forward.
Israel has been accused of committing war crimes in this war. Will you support those investigations?
Look, I'm trying to make peace in this situation between the two sides. So, you know, for me, I've got to work with the Israeli government. I've got to work with the Palestinians.
Does that mean bringing in Hamas?
Anyone who goes in and sees what has happened.
Excuse me interrupting. I know that you're quite enthusiastic to speak to Hamas, and there has been calls within the EU to increase Hamas. Will you get to meet them face to face?
Well, there is engagement, not by me, because the Quartet principles, and I'm the Quartet representative, say we shouldn't directly engage with Hamas. But there is direct engagement happening with Hamas at the moment. Again, it's important people understand this. Egypt is talking to Hamas. Until, however, we get some sort of common basis for moving forward, it's quite hard to see what this engagement will produce. In other words, if you want a unity government on the Palestinian side, you have to have a basis for that unity. Now, I hope that we can get that basis for unity, because this would be, again, so much easier to resolve if the Palestinian politics were one united politics. But we will have to see. The Egyptians are handling this negotiation at the moment. I hope it's successful. But as I say, we will see.
Can you tell us about your working relationship with the Obama administration? I know you're very close to George Bush. Are we likely to see more of the same?
Well, I think the first thing to say about the Obama administration is that President Obama, from the very first day in office, signified this was a problem. He's appointed Senator George Mitchell, who obviously I worked very closely with over Northern Ireland, and who's an excellent and shrewd negotiator. You've got Senator Clinton making it absolutely clear from her perspective, I should say Secretary of State Clinton from her perspective, that this is a priority for her in the foreign policy of America. It's a good start. Now we've got to see it through. But I always said before the American election, the single most important thing was that the incoming president indicated it was a priority from the first day. Because the trouble is, when a president of America makes it a priority towards the end of their time, it's a lot harder to deliver it.
Can we throw ahead again to the donor conference, which is taking place tomorrow? What can you expect from that? How soon can we see this aid getting to those who need it most?
I hope quickly. I mean, I think there's going to be no doubt that you will get a big headline figure. And incidentally, there's no doubt either that the donors genuinely, whether they're Arabs or Europeans or Americans, want that money to go through to the Gazan people. But obviously, as we were saying earlier in the interview, you've got to have the crossings functioning in order to get that those materials through. So, for example, I was seeing today a project we actually brought to fruition in Gaza in 2008, which was the creation of a proper sanitation treatment works in Gaza. Very, very important project, because the sanitation system there is dependent on this project being built. But we need the materials. You know, we need the pipes, we need the cement, and so on. And so, yes, I think you will get a major commitment and a big headline figure out of Sham. What we've got to make sure that we also get is the means of getting that money in and getting it working to the benefit of the Gazan people. Any
idea when these crossings will open up? You said that is essential to getting the aid in. Any idea when we can see that happen?
I think it depends very much, in part, on obviously the position of the international community. And as I say, I personally believe we've got to let the material in the broadest humanitarian sense into Gaza as quickly as possible. But it also depends on the negotiation that, again, the Egyptians are conducting with Hamas on the one side, but also talking obviously to Israel as to how you make sure that whatever ceasefire there is, and as you can see, that's being also broken daily with rockets being fired and so on. The question is, will you be able to get that ceasefire sufficiently durable and sustainable that the crossings are opened and opened on a regular basis?
OK, Tony Blair, thank you very much for giving us so much of your time.